How fast did that happen kind of across the industry where the people going on these shows realized that, this isn't necessarily art. This is a way for me to get out there and do bigger things with it?
Well, I'm not sure that many people, other than the Louds, really thought they were making art per se. I mean, I definitely think even the very innocent first season of The Real World, they understood that they were going on a documentary on MTV, and they were all artists. So they understood that it was some kind of publicity. I'm somebody who, by the way, I feel like there's this divide on reality shows where people talk about, are they there for the right reasons? That was somewhat created by The Bachelor, I think. And I think this is this very brutal calculation where you're going to judge people for going on a television show and wanting to be famous. I think that is absolutely unjustifiable. A person who goes on a dating reality show just because they want to fall in love is already showing poor judgment. Like, it's normal for people to have multiple motives. But it is true that during the period that I'm writing about, even if people wanted to get famous and they hoped for big opportunities, it wasn't very easy to get those things. There wasn't exactly an off-ramp from becoming a reality star to becoming an actual Hollywood star. And a lot of people, including on the shows at the turn of the century after Survivor, when there was a big boom in production, people would flood into Hollywood and they would be famous because they'd been on a reality show, but they didn't have some talent or representation. They were a household name. People recognized them on the street, but they had no money and they had no protection from their fans and their haters. And they had no way to monetize that fame. So the desire to be famous definitely is something that some people felt when they went on TV. Why wouldn't they? They were going to be on TV. But the aftermath is a whole different thing. And it's some of the stories I told in the book were funny to me. Like, I talked to Darva Conger, who was on Who Wants to Marry a Multimillionaire, which was a show on Fox that was essentially sort of a parody of the Miss America pageant, where a guy married a woman he'd never met, which at the time, I believe it was 1999, was an absolutely outrageous idea that has now become bizarrely normalized, where people marry strangers all the time. What's odd about that? But at the time, it was a very shocking thing. And also the show itself, it's a long story, but the show was a huge hit, got big ratings. And then in the aftermath, the guy turned out to have a history of domestic violence, and he had a restraining order taken out against him. And that was such bad publicity that it canceled the show and the people who created it. It was this huge thing. But Darva Conger was the bride for that show. And after she was on the air, she was a laughingstock in the country, and she did a bunch of publicity to try to tell her side of the story. But she also, I think, perfectly sensibly and strategically was like, look, now that I'm famous, I might as well try to make something of it. They gave her an offer to appear on Playboy, which she did, and she got some money from that. But she also tried to create a website, like a lifestyle website, that had her interest in gardening and cooking and fashion. And this was in 1999. And all I can say is that there was no success to her attempt to create this, but it was actually very prescient, right? Because that's what people do all the time now. It was like an early attempt at being an influencer and trying to turn your fame into something that went beyond the show. But until there was actually an infrastructure for that in the form of Instagram, a lot of people had, I think, stars in their eyes about what was going to happen in the aftermath of the show that were not fulfilled. And that's just the nature of the beast. There was a long period when there was a real tension in Hollywood between reality stars and real stars, like scripted actors, because they were both in the town. And at this point, I think there's a surprising amount of overlap between those two sides, but not during the period I was writing about, where anybody who worked in reality on either side of the camera was in a marginalized community that was sort of a little dirty, definitely cheaper, and outside of Hollywood glamour.